The clatter of a distant tea trolley rattled Julian Thorne's concentration, but he didn't flinch. His eyes, the color of glacial ice, remained fixed on the projection shimmering against the otherwise pristine white wall of his office. A complex network diagram, charting the flow of funds through shell corporations, pulsed with an almost organic rhythm. Each node, each vector, represented a piece of a puzzle, and Julian, draped in the impeccably tailored charcoal suit that was as much a uniform as a second skin, was in his element. His office, a stark modernist sanctuary tucked away in a quiet mews just a stone's throw from Baker Street, was a testament to his ethos: clean lines, functional design, unyielding logic. No clutter, no sentimentality, just tools for the dissection of truth. The faint scent of old paper from Arthur Finch's adjacent, labyrinthine chambers occasionally wafted in, a subtle intrusion from a world Julian sought to meticulously compartmentalize. He was good, exceptionally so. The press called him the Oracle's shadow, a nod to Arthur Finch, the reclusive Baker Street Oracle, whose own eccentric genius still drew the most confounding cases London could offer. But Julian bristled at the moniker. Finch might have the theatrical flair, the uncanny deductions drawn from lint and dust, but Julian was the architect of irrefutable proof, the one who built the inescapable case brick by painstaking logical brick. He dealt in facts, in evidence, in the tangible. Yet, a subtle disquiet gnawed at him. Over the years, a handful of cases, solved with elegant precision, had left behind a faint, almost imperceptible residue of the unexplainable. A witness's inexplicable clairvoyance that saved a life, a fleeting anomaly in forensic data that simply couldn't be replicated, a sense of something else. Julian had dismissed them, filed them under anecdotal oddities or observer bias, but they lingered, like an itch he couldn't quite reach. He tapped a stylus against his chin, tracing a line on the projection. "The money trail is clean here, Mr. Peterson," he murmured, speaking to the empty room. His voice was a low baritone, precise and devoid of unnecessary inflection. A perfect decoy. But the subsidiary CEO, Mr. Armitage, he filed a patent on a microcapacitor design a month before the acquisition. Far too specific for a holding company with no prior tech interests. The thought solidified. There. The rational explanation always existed. A soft chime from his desk interrupted his flow. An intercom. "Julian, a moment, if you please," Arthur Finch's voice, dry as parchment, drifted through. "Our new client has arrived." Julian sighed, running a hand over his neatly trimmed dark hair. Another tangled web of corporate espionage or a high-stakes fraud, no doubt. He pushed the disquieting thoughts to the back of his mind. Logic demanded his full attention. He found Finch in his usual habitat, a room that seemed to defy the laws of physics by containing more books and bizarre artifacts than its dimensions allowed. Dusty light filtered through tall sash windows, illuminating motes dancing in the air like tiny, forgotten secrets. Finch, a tall, skeletal man with eyes that missed nothing behind gold-rimmed spectacles, sat hunched over a cluttered mahogany desk, a magnifying glass poised over an antique map. Across from him sat a woman. Julian's gaze swept over her, instantly cataloging details. Mid-30s, perhaps, neatly dressed in practical but elegant Muggle attire, a tailored tweed blazer over a cream blouse, dark trousers. Her hair, a familiar riot of brown curls, was pulled back in a tidy bun, though a few rebellious strands framed a face etched with intelligence and a quiet intensity. Her hands, clasped in her lap, were surprisingly steady for someone presumably seeking a private detective's help. "Julian, allow me to introduce Ms. Hermione Granger," Finch said, lowering his magnifying glass and offering a thin, almost imperceptible smile. "Ms. Granger, this is my associate, Julian Thorne. He will be assisting with your unique inquiry." Hermione Granger. The name resonated with a faint, almost forgotten hum in the back of Julian's mind. He was Muggle-born, but stories, whispers of a hidden world, had filtered down to him once, long ago, when an owl had delivered a rather preposterous letter to his childhood home. He dismissed it as a prank, a convoluted cult recruitment, and never looked back. But now, seeing her, there was something in her posture, her unwavering gaze, that felt familiar in its unfamiliarity. Julian offered a curt nod, his expression carefully neutral. "Ms. Granger, what is the nature of your unique inquiry?" He deliberately put air quotes around the last two words. Hermione met his gaze directly, her brown eyes surprisingly keen, missing nothing of his skepticism. "Mr. Thorne, I believe the matter I bring to you falls outside the conventional scope of your investigations. I am here because Mr. Finch's reputation for understanding the truly extraordinary precedes him." She paused, taking a breath. "I need your help with the Deathly Hallows." Julian's brow furrowed. "The what now? Deathly Hallows? Are we speaking of ancient folklore? Children's tales?" He glanced at Finch, expecting him to interject, to dismiss this outright. But Finch merely observed, a faint, knowing gleam in his eyes. Hermione's voice remained calm, though a hint of exasperation flickered. "They are not tales, Mr. Thorne. They are real, ancient, powerful artifacts. 3 of them, an elder wand, a resurrection stone, and a cloak of invisibility. They grant immense power to their possessor, power that has historically led to untold devastation." Julian scoffed, a short, sharp sound. "A wand that grants immense power? A stone that brings back the dead? A cloak that renders one invisible? Ms. Granger, with all due respect, this sounds like fantasy. Perhaps you've come to the wrong establishment. We deal in evidence, in facts, in the measurable world." "Precisely," Hermione countered, leaning forward slightly. "And that is why I require your assistance. These artifacts, particularly the Elder Wand and the Resurrection Stone, are too dangerous to remain uncontrolled. Their existence is a threat, not just to my world, but potentially to yours as well. There are forces, ancient and subtle, seeking to exploit their power. And my usual methods, my usual resources, they are proving insufficient against an adversary whose methods are as obscure as their goals." "Your world?" Julian queried, honing in on the odd phrasing. He leaned against a tall bookshelf, arms crossed, trying to project an air of disinterest. "And what might that be?" "A secret society of conjurers and illusionists." A muscle twitched in Hermione's jaw, but her voice remained even. "My world is one where magic is real, Mr. Thorne. Hidden, yes, from most, but undeniably real. And these hallows are conduits of that magic. Someone is attempting to gather them, to harness their power to manipulate history itself." Julian felt a familiar surge of irritation. This was the unexplainable writ large, staring him in the face. He'd spent his entire professional life dissecting lies, finding the rational explanation behind every baffling occurrence. A magician's trick, a mass delusion, a sophisticated con. This was no different. "Manipulation of history," Julian repeated, his voice laced with heavy skepticism. "So, you're suggesting someone is using these mythical items to travel through time? To change the past?" He pushed off the bookshelf, walking towards the window, looking out at the mundane London street. A red double-decker bus trundled by. This was reality. Not necessarily time travel in the conventional sense, Hermione explained, her voice gaining a more academic, urgent tone. More a subtle reshaping, an altering of causality, influencing events through their inherent magical properties. The Order of Aevum, as they call themselves, believes they are destined to wield this power. The Order of Aevum, Julian deadpanned. "And I suppose they wear dark cloaks and chant in Latin under a full moon?" He turned back, his gaze sharp, dismissive. "Ms. Granger, I respect Mr. Finch's unconventional approaches, but I simply cannot entertain such fanciful notions. There is always a rational explanation. Always." Finch, who had been silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke, his voice surprisingly firm. "And that, Julian, is precisely why you will take this case." Julian stared, aghast. "Arthur, are you serious? She's speaking of magic wands and resurrection stones. This is beyond the pale. We have a fraud case involving an offshore account in the Caymans that's far more pressing, not to mention tangible." "The Caymans can wait," Finch said, waving a dismissive hand. "Tangible, you say? What is more tangible than a threat to the very fabric of reality, however subtly presented?" He fixed Julian with a look that cut through his defenses. "You have a gift, Julian, for finding the truth, however deeply buried. You pride yourself on observing the unobservable, on making the invisible visible. Ms. Granger presents a phenomenon that, by your own admission, defies your current understanding. Is that not precisely the challenge you claim to seek? Julian gritted his teeth. He knew that look. Finch wasn't merely assigning a case. He was issuing a direct challenge to Julian's core philosophy. But, Arthur. No, that's Julian. You will interview Ms. Granger thoroughly. You will delve into her claims, her magic, as she calls it. And you will apply your formidable logic to unravel what she perceives as inexplicable. Find the seams, Julian. Find the trick. Finch's gaze sharpened, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. Prove her wrong if you can. Julian swallowed, the cynical satisfaction of his solved cases suddenly feeling hollow. He looked from Finch's knowing eyes to Hermione's expectant, unwavering gaze. She wasn't mad, he decided, at least not in the clinical sense. Deluded, perhaps, or entangled in some elaborate hoax. But her conviction was absolute. And if Finch believed there was something here, however absurd, then Julian was honor-bound to investigate. He exhaled slowly, a defeated sigh. Very well, he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Ms. Granger. My office. Now. And bring every single piece of evidence you possess, no matter how fantastical. Hermione offered a small, almost triumphant nod. Excellent, Mr. Thorne. I assure you, it will be quite an education. As Julian strode back to his immaculate office, the clean lines and rational order suddenly felt precarious. He glanced at the empty projection screen, the ghost of the complex network diagram still lingering in his mind. He was about to embark on a case where the nodes were mythical artifacts, the vectors were ancient curses, and the money trail was an entirely different kind of power. He was Julian Thorne, the master of logic, and he had just been handed a case about magic. The itch he couldn't reach had just become a gaping chasm, threatening to swallow his meticulously constructed reality whole. And for the first time in his career, he had absolutely no idea where to even begin. Julian sat hunched over his desk, the blue glow of his monitor illuminating the sharp planes of his face. The air in the office, usually a crisp blend of aged paper and strong Earl Grey, felt charged, almost hummed with an unseen static since Hermione Granger's departure. He pushed aside a pile of meticulously catalogued evidence photos from a recent corporate espionage case, mundane, predictable, solvable. His mind, however, kept replaying snippets of Hermione's visit. An ancient relic capable of manipulating destiny, unstable, could unravel reality itself. Ridiculous. Utterly, categorically ridiculous. Yet, a nagging dissonance persisted, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor at the edge of his perfectly ordered analytical world. He'd always prided himself on dissecting the unexplainable until it yielded its mundane core. But Hermione's claims, delivered with such unwavering conviction, felt different, unyielding. He reached for the battered file marked unresolved, fringe anomalies. It was a slim collection of cases, each one an irritant, a sliver under the skin of his otherwise pristine record. A bank heist where security cameras inexplicably glitched for precisely 3 minutes, showing only static, despite being independently powered. A rare artifact collector whose locked vault seemed to have spontaneously disassembled and reassembled, leaving the contents rearranged but nothing stolen. He'd always attributed them to highly sophisticated, unseen technologies or elaborate practical jokes, but they never quite fit. Now, he wondered if they were something else entirely. A sharp rap on his office door startled him. "Come in," Julian called, straightening. Arthur Finch entered, a steaming mug cradled in his hands. He settled into the worn leather armchair opposite Julian's desk, his gaze keen, assessing. "Troubled waters, Julian?" Julian grunted. "Just reviewing some older cases. There's a pattern of incongruity I've been meaning to revisit." He avoided mentioning Granger. Finch merely took a slow sip of his tea. "Indeed. The world, my dear boy, is often more complex than our neatest formulas allow. Speaking of which, a rather unique set of circumstances has just landed on my desk. I believe it might pique your particular interest." Julian raised an eyebrow, a flicker of professional curiosity overriding his internal turmoil. Details? Professor Eleazar Croft, Finch began, a well-respected Egyptologist from the British Museum. His private study in his Kensington townhouse was ransacked last night. Curiously, nothing of significant monetary value was taken. Only his latest research notes concerning a recently unearthed Coptic scroll fragment and a rather unimpressive-looking, lead-encased amulet. The police are baffled. Ransacked how? Julian pressed, already reaching for a notepad. Finch leaned forward slightly. There's the rub. No forced entry. No broken windows. The alarm system was inexplicably disarmed from the inside, but Croft insists he was asleep and no one else had access. Furthermore, the scene itself is chaotic beyond belief. Croft described it as if a small cyclone had manifested solely within his study. Furniture overturned, books levitating before crashing down, inkwell exploded, but no discernible splash on the walls or ceiling, just a black stain on the Persian rug beneath where it stood. Julian felt a familiar, unwelcome chill trace down his spine. This wasn't a sophisticated thief. This sounded like those fringe anomalies. He pushed the thought away. An isolated gas leak leading to a minor explosion, perhaps? Or a structural integrity failure. Finch smiled, a knowing glint in his eyes. The police explored those avenues, naturally. No structural damage beyond the contents, no gas residue. And the books, Julian. Croft swears some of them were floating. For a moment, at least, before they dropped. One even landed open, face down, in the ceiling fan. Julian stared at him, the analytical machinery of his mind whirring, trying to find a purchase, a logical anchor point in Finch's description. Nothing. It sounded impossible. I've already dispatched a cab for you, Finch continued, sensing Julian's internal struggle. Professor Croft is understandably distressed. Perhaps your unique perspective, Julian, can offer some clarity where the local constabulary has failed. The Kensington townhouse was an elegant, if somewhat antiquated, Victorian residence. Julian, equipped with his forensic kit, entered Professor Croft's study and immediately felt a prickle of unease. The room was a disaster zone exactly as Finch had described. An antique globe lay shattered, its contents scattered like debris. Books were everywhere, some ripped, some bent. One even embedded spine-first into the plaster wall. A large mahogany desk was overturned, its drawers wrenched open. The faint scent of ozone hung in the air, oddly metallic and acrid. He meticulously scanned the room, flashlight beam dancing over surfaces, dusting for prints. Nothing useful. No footprints, no signs of struggle beyond the room itself, no tool marks. The security panel, still disarmed, showed no sign of tampering. It was as if the room had simply decided to erupt. Professor Croft, Julian said, turning to the trembling old man, can you describe anything at all that felt unusual before you went to sleep? Any strange sounds? Odors? Croft wrung his hands. Only a faint humming, like a swarm of bees, but deeper. And a chill, despite the fire being lit. I dismissed it as old house creaks drafts. He gestured vaguely. Then I woke to this pandemonium. Julian spent an hour, 2 hours, applying every logical and scientific principle he possessed. He photographed, measured, sampled. Every piece of evidence, when viewed individually, was baffling. Collectively, it screamed a silent, impossible truth that Julian's mind refused to articulate. The ink on the rug, for instance. It was clearly from the exploded inkwell, yet there was no discernible pattern of splash or dispersal, just a roughly circular stain, as if the liquid had simply appeared there. The books on the ceiling fan. How could they have reached such a height without some form of projection or sustained levitation? He was halfway through bagging a fragment of a Coptic scroll, overlooked by the initial police sweep, when his phone buzzed. It was Hermione. Mr. Thorne, her voice was calm, yet had an underlying urgency. I've just heard about Professor Croft. Are you there? Julian straightened, a sudden knot forming in his stomach. How did you? Never mind. Yes, I'm here. And frankly, Granger, this scene defies every known law of physics. Which, I suppose, is where you come in. The words tasted bitter, like a forced admission of defeat. "I thought it might," she replied, a hint of something unreadable in her tone. "It fits the pattern. More incidents have occurred this morning." A small library in Hampstead reported a spontaneous fire, extinguished by an equally spontaneous downpour inside the building. And a portion of the old Roman wall near Tower Hill just disintegrated. Not crumbling, Mr. Thorne. Disintegrated into dust. "I believe the phenomenon is accelerating." Julian felt his jaw clench. "Disintegrated? Are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting, Mr. Thorne," Hermione said with a sigh, "that whatever force is responsible for the instability surrounding the Deathly Hallows is becoming more active, more desperate. It's manifesting in increasingly obvious ways. These aren't isolated incidents. They're probes, tests, or perhaps uncontrolled bursts of magic." "Magic," Julian scoffed, though the conviction was waning. "Look, I need to see this myself. This disintegration." He was still looking for a rational loophole, a way to dismiss the impossible. "Meet me at the base of the Tower Hill segment, near the river," Hermione instructed. 10 minutes. Julian packed his bag with a renewed sense of urgency, a chilling premonition replacing his skepticism. He muttered a quick apology to Professor Croft, promising to be in touch, and hailed a cab. The world was clearly losing its mind, and he, the staunch rationalist, was about to be dragged into its lunacy. Tower Hill was bustling with lunchtime crowds, oblivious to the subtle shifts in reality around them. Julian spotted Hermione easily, standing near a section of the ancient Roman wall, her head tilted, observing. As he approached, he noticed a section of the wall, perhaps 5 feet wide and 10 feet high, was simply gone. Not collapsed, not chipped away, but vanished, leaving a perfect, clean-edged void as if cut by an invisible laser. The ground beneath it was covered in fine, gray dust, like ancient ash. "Still think it's faulty masonry, Mr. Thorne?" Hermione asked, without turning. Julian stared at the void. His mind frantically searched for an explanation. Demolition? No, too precise, too sudden. Erosion? Impossible for such a short time frame. He walked right up to the edge of the vanished section, reaching out a hand, feeling the roughness of the remaining stone. There was nothing, only empty air where solid rock should have been. I don't know what I think, he admitted, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. He was Julian Thorne, the man who always knew what he thought. Suddenly, a faint shimmer appeared in the air directly in front of them, just above the remaining wall. It was like heat haze, but sharper, more defined, coalescing into a shimmering, almost translucent shape. Julian instinctively recoiled, his mind screaming, impossible. The shimmer solidified into a faint outline, reminiscent of an ancient, ornate dagger. It pulsed with a soft, ethereal light, utterly silent. Julian's breath hitched. He wasn't looking at light refracted through air or a trick of the eye. He was looking at something not there, yet undeniably present. A manifestation, Hermione whispered, her eyes wide. Residual magic. A momentary imprint of the object that caused the disintegration. The dagger-like shape pulsed once more, growing brighter, then twisted, morphing into a fleeting, grotesque silhouette of a snarling face. A face Julian recognized from one of the distorted figures in an illuminated manuscript he'd studied in Professor Croft's ransacked study. It was terrifying and beautiful, malevolent and fragile. Then, with a faint, almost inaudible pop, it vanished, leaving nothing but the memory of its impossible existence hanging in the air. Julian felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He gripped the edge of the wall, steadying himself. His carefully constructed world, built on empirical evidence and rational thought, was crumbling around him, disintegrating just like the Roman wall. He had witnessed it. Undeniably. His eyes had not deceived him. His brain, however, was in full revolt. What was that? He rasped, his voice rough. Hermione turned to him, her expression a mixture of concern and grim determination. That, Mr. Thorne, was magic. And it's becoming increasingly erratic. Someone is either wielding it recklessly or seeking to control a force far beyond their understanding. Professor Croft's amulet and notes, The library fire, the wall, they all point to an escalation. A search for something specific, or perhaps a clearing of obstacles. We need to work together, Mr. Thorne. Now more than ever. Your logic, combined with my knowledge of this, is our only chance to understand what we're up against. Julian looked from the empty space in the wall to Hermione's earnest face. The anger, the frustration, the denial, they were still there, warring within him. But beneath it, a new emotion stirred, a terrifying, exhilarating curiosity. His mind, always seeking the puzzle, the solution, now faced the ultimate enigma. He swallowed hard. Fine, he bit out, the word a grudging admission of surrender and a desperate grab for answers. But I'm going to need you to explain every impossible detail. He pointed at the phantom dagger's last resting place. Starting with that. Hermione offered a faint, understanding smile. Of course. Let's begin at the beginning, shall we? With the nature of the veil itself, and the people who would tear it down. She gestured towards the void in the ancient wall. Because I have a suspicion that the Order of Aevum is not just looking for the Hallows, Mr. Thorne. I think they're leaving a calling card. The acrid scent of ozone still clung to Julian's memory, a phantom burn on his senses. He sat across from Hermione Granger in the familiar, cluttered comfort of Finch's office, the gas lamps casting a warm, anachronistic glow against the darkening London sky. His usual fastidious neatness felt affronted. The neatly catalogued mental shelves of his understanding had been appended, their contents scattered. So, Julian began, the word tasting like ash. He picked up a discarded matchstick, twirling it with precise movements between his thumb and forefinger. Let's reevaluate. You claim that the incident at the British Museum was an attack by individuals who use, for lack of a better term, magic. The disappearance of Dr. Armitage, the levitation of the Rosetta Stone, you attribute these to spells and enchantments. Hermione, ever practical, leaned forward, her expression a mixture of patience and urgency. Not just claims, Julian. You saw it. Or rather, you saw the aftermath of it. The structural warping, the impossible dispersal of objects, the residual magical signatures I identified. You saw the cause of the chaos in the museum was not conventional physics. Julian flinched internally. He had seen it. The air had shimmered. The space around the displaced artifacts had felt wrong. His logical mind, usually a fortress, was under siege, forced to admit an anomalous variable. Very well, he conceded, the words stiff. Let us hypothetically accept the premise of magic as a quantifiable, if currently uncatalogued, force. If so, it must operate under its own set of rules. Your spells are merely applied physics, albeit of a highly unconventional nature. Therefore, the question becomes, what are these rules, and how were they exploited? Hermione's eyes brightened. Precisely. Magic isn't just random incantations. It has laws, principles, inherent limitations, and strengths. It's an energy source, a manipulation of reality through intent and knowledge, focused by wands. And those who attacked Dr. Armitage and presumably Dr. Bellamy before him demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of it. Arthur Finch, who had been silently observing from his armchair by the roaring fire, finally spoke, his voice a low rumble. The common thread, gentlemen, is not merely the victims' professions, but their area of expertise. Ancient civilizations, forgotten languages, lost artifacts. Dr. Armitage was close to publishing his findings on a newly deciphered Minoan tablet, wasn't he? And Dr. Bellamy, before his unfortunate accident, was immersed in Sumerian cuneiform relating to astronomical observatories. Julian's fingers stilled. Indeed, a convergence. Not random targets, but specific researchers investigating specific, ancient topics. The question is why? What connection could there be between archaic texts and your Deathly Hallows? He still couldn't bring himself to say it without a touch of derision. Hermione pulled a worn, leather-bound book from her beaded bag. The Hallows are ancient, Julian. Their legends predate recorded history in many Muggle accounts, emerging as folklore, myths, and religious iconography. The Cloak of Invisibility, the Resurrection Stone, the Elder Wand, They are deeply intertwined with the fabric of magic, and their power is immense. Whoever is targeting these researchers isn't just after knowledge, they're after the Hallows themselves, or access to the historical context that surrounds them. Then we need to understand the Hallows, not just as magical artifacts, but as historical phenomena, Julian mused, rising to pace. His logical engine was whirring back to life, fueled now by this new, bizarre data. What do these Minoan and Sumerian texts reveal? Are there any patterns? Any specific symbols, names, or events that recur in connection with the Hallows? That's where we hit a snag, Hermione admitted. The wizarding world's historical records on the Hallows are fragmented, often biased, and frequently contradictory. Most of what we have are legends, fairy tales, and a few vague prophecies. Then we cross-reference, Julian declared, his old zeal returning. Muggle and magical sources. There must be parallels, even if disguised. Symbols, astronomical alignments, geological anomalies, architectural designs, patterns that might have been ignored because their true meaning was obscured by the veil you spoke of. If magic is a fundamental force, its influence would not be confined to a secret society. It would leave its mark on the broader canvas of history, subtly influencing civilizations without their knowledge. Thus began an intensive, almost frenetic period of research. Julian, armed with Hermione's foundational magical knowledge, delved into Muggle academic archives with renewed purpose. He cross-referenced archaic astronomical charts with known magical convergences, compared ancient architectural blueprints with descriptions of magical wards, and scoured archaeological reports for anomalies dismissed as unusual geological formations or unexplained cultural practices. Hermione, meanwhile, navigated the more esoteric corners of the wizarding world. She brought back translations of obscure runes, interpretations of cryptic prophecies from ancient seers, and excerpts from forgotten grimoires. The two of them would often convene in Finch's office, the air thick with parchment, old book smell, and the hum of Julian's laptop. Julian's initial discomfort with the concept of magic slowly morphed into a grudging respect, then a burgeoning fascination. He found himself applying his formidable deductive skills to magical theory, treating it as an uncharted field of physics. If a disillusionment charm renders an object invisible, he theorized one evening, tapping a pen against a dusty tome on ancient Egyptian curses, it must be manipulating light refraction, perhaps at a subatomic level. Therefore, it might be possible to detect residual magical energy by observing specific spectral shifts, rather than relying solely on your tracking spells. Hermione, astonished, jotted down notes. Their breakthrough came unexpectedly, late one night in the hallowed halls of the British Library. Julian was examining digitized copies of ancient Sumerian tablets, focusing on abstract symbols that appeared frequently but had no clear linguistic translation. Hermione, beside him, was scanning a 17th century French magical treatise on obscure wards. "Look at this," Julian murmured, pointing to a recurring motif, 3 interwoven triangles, sometimes depicted with a central eye, sometimes a radiating star. It appears in Minoan script, in early Celtic carvings, and here, in this obscure Sumerian creation myth. Archaeologists dismiss it as a universal symbol of divinity or interconnectedness. Hermione squinted at his screen, then gasped. "Julian, that's it. That's the symbol of the Deathly Hallows." She flipped open her book. The triangular shape represents the cloak, the circle the stone, and the vertical line the Elder Wand. But this, it's slightly altered, integrated into a more complex design. Julian stared, his mind racing. Not altered, integrated. This symbol isn't just about the Hallows, it's about something else that incorporates the Hallows. And it's not merely a magical symbol, it's a pancultural emblem, appearing across disparate ancient civilizations. Meaning, whoever created or understood this symbol's true significance predated the veil of secrecy. They worked feverishly, cross-referencing every instance of the symbol they could find. They traced its appearance through various historical periods and cultures, finding it embedded in obscure Gnostic texts, cryptic alchemical diagrams, and even faintly etched into the foundation stones of ancient European megaliths. Every time this symbol appears, Julian narrated, Scrolling through images, it's associated with concepts of time, destiny, unseen influence, or reshaping fate. Always subtly, never overtly. Hermione's eyes widened. The Order of Aevum. Aevum is Latin for age or eternity. They're interested in time and history itself. She looked up from her notes, her voice dropping. There are hushed whispers in some of the older wizarding families about a very ancient, very secretive society. They believe they are the true guardians of history, manipulating events from the shadows. Some say they dabble in forbidden magic related to temporal manipulation. Julian paused, a cold certainty settling in his gut. Temporal manipulation. Reshaping fate. The Hallows. If these artifacts can truly command death, or render one unseen, or grant insurmountable power, what would they mean to an organization obsessed with controlling the flow of history? He pulled up another document, a digitized scan of a fragmented parchment from an old antiquarian collection. It detailed an ancient prophecy attributed to a nameless oracle concerning 3 gifts from death and a shadow order that would seek to unravel the skein of time. Below the faded script, faintly visible, was the interwoven triangle symbol, subtly distorted, almost a mirror image of the Hallows emblem. This is more than just academic interest, Julian stated, his voice hushed. This is a declaration of intent. They're not just studying the Hallows, they're planning to use them. He pointed to a particular line in the prophecy, which had previously seemed nonsensical. It read, "When the sands of Old England speak through the eyes of the forgotten, the path to the weaver's loom shall be revealed." Sands of Old England? A specific location? Hermione pondered. Eyes of the Forgotten, a historical figure? A statue. Julian leaned closer to the screen, his mind piecing together disparate facts with breathtaking speed. England. Sands. The phrase sands of time is a common idiom, but literally sands. Ancient, historical sand. And the eyes of the forgotten, a specific reference, perhaps. What if it's not an eye at all, but a homophone? An eye. He thought of ancient Roman roads, of the hidden Mithraic temples beneath London, of the deep, geological layers beneath the city. Then, a name surfaced from the depths of his memory, an obscure footnote from an old geological survey he'd read years ago. A strange, almost poetic description of a subterranean chamber discovered during a Victorian excavation for a new sewage line, then sealed away and largely forgotten. Its walls were described as weeping sand, and inside, a peculiar eye-like mineral deposit. The chamber lay directly beneath an abandoned, dilapidated chapel built on Roman foundations, the chapel itself situated on a long-forgotten route once dubbed the Weaver's Path by medieval cartographers. The Weaver's Loom, Julian whispered, connecting the dots. It's not just a metaphorical place, Hermione. It's a physical location. Beneath London. There's an old Roman site, a forgotten chapel, built on a route once called the Weaver's Path. And deep beneath it, a chamber described as speaking with sand, containing an eye of stone. It was sealed off due to unstable ground, deemed too dangerous. He looked up, his eyes meeting Hermione's, alight with a new, fierce clarity. The Order of Aevum isn't just observing history, Hermione. They're about to rewrite it. And I think I know where they'll make their move. The ancient Latin inscription Julian had meticulously translated, combined with the fragmented magical runes Hermione identified, pointed to one name with chilling clarity, Silas Blackwood. The acclaimed antiquarian, the very man who had initially expressed such polite interest in Hermione's early inquiries into the Hallows, was at the heart of the conspiracy. The crucial clue, a subtly coded reference to Aevum's architect, within a seemingly innocuous academic journal Blackwood had recently published, solidified their suspicions. He's not just interested in the Hallows, Julian stated, tracing the intertwined symbols on his desk. He believes he's the rightful custodian, or perhaps, the controller of time itself. Architect of Aevum isn't merely a title, it's a declaration of intent. Hermione, pacing the worn Persian rug of Finch's office, ran a hand through her already disheveled hair. Manipulating history. I've read legends, dark magic users who sought such power, but always thought them exaggerated. The Hallows, specifically the Elder Wand and the Resurrection Stone, could theoretically be warped to that end, if someone were mad enough. Finch, perched on the edge of his chaise lounge, steepled his fingers, his gaze distant. Madness is often merely ambition unconstrained by foresight. Blackwood, it seems, possesses foresight in abundance, if his plans are as grand as they appear. Their lead was a gala at the Royal Historical Society that evening, a private viewing of newly acquired Roman artifacts, curated, of course, by Blackwood himself. It was the perfect stage for a man who saw himself as a puppet master of history. "We need to confront him directly," Julian declared, a new steel in his voice. The abstract fear of the unexplainable had been replaced by the very real threat of Blackwood. Force him to admit his involvement, expose his order. Hermione nodded, pulling out her wand and checking its feel. "He won't admit anything without a fight, Julian. We're stepping into a viper's nest." Julian found himself, inexplicably, gripping a heavy brass letter opener. It was a poor substitute for a wand, but the solid metal felt grounding. He was walking into a world where his primary tools, logic, observation, deduction, might be met with an invisible blast of power. Yet, a nascent pattern recognition had begun to stir within him. He was starting to see the logic of magic, however unsettling that thought was. The Royal Historical Society was a grand Victorian building, its stately halls now buzzing with London's academic elite. Blackwood moved among them with an effortless charm, a scholarly smile plastered on his face. He seemed utterly at ease, a true master of his domain. Julian felt a familiar knot of frustration. How could such a rational world host such an irrational threat? They cornered Blackwood near a display of ancient scrolls, away from the thickest part of the crowd. "Professor Blackwood," Julian began, his voice calm, "a word, if you please. Regarding certain anachronisms in your recent historical reevaluations." Blackwood turned, his smile unwavering, though his eyes, Julian noted, held a fleeting flicker of something colder. "Mr. Thorne, Ms. Granger. And of course, the esteemed Mr. Finch. A pleasure, though unexpected, to see you all here. Enjoying the artifacts, I trust." "We've been enjoying your latest publication, Professor," Hermione interjected, her tone deceptively sweet. "Particularly your innovative interpretation of the Architect of Aevum myth." Blackwood's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly. A fascinating piece of folklore, isn't it? A testament to humanity's enduring fascination with destiny. Pure academic speculation, of course. Pure speculation that happens to align perfectly with a hidden society's decades-long pursuit of the Deathly Hallows, Julian countered, stepping closer. A society that calls itself the Order of Aevum, and whose leader, we've deduced, is you. The air around them seemed to thicken. Blackwood's facade finally cracked, revealing the sharp, predatory intelligence beneath. His eyes narrowed. "Deduction, Mr. Thorne, is a quaint Muggle tool. It's often limited by the scope of what one believes to be possible." He chuckled softly, a sound that sent a chill down Julian's spine. "You flatter me, of course, suggesting I could orchestrate such a grand vision." Grand visions that involve tampering with history, creating anomalies to test the Hallows' power, Hermione pressed, her hand subtly reaching for her wand. "Attacks on researchers, destabilizing magical artifacts, all to pave the way for your endgame." Blackwood sighed dramatically, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You speak of a grand design, Ms. Granger, but you misunderstand. History is not a tapestry to be admired, it is a river to be directed. Humanity yearns for order, for a clear path. The Hallows offer that control. And I, as the architect, merely wish to guide the current for the greater good." "The greater good usually means your good, Blackwood," Julian shot back. "And it's a terrifyingly subjective concept when wielded by someone who believes themselves above consequence." A sudden, sharp crack echoed, too subtle for the Muggles present to notice, but Julian felt it like a physical blow to his inner ear. Hermione gasped. A faint, shimmering barrier, barely visible, flickered into existence around Blackwood. "My apologies," Blackwood said, his voice now devoid of any pretense of academic civility. "But you've become inconvenient, and rather too perceptive." He raised a hand, and with a swift, fluid motion, a nearby display cabinet, holding a priceless Roman amphora, shuddered. Julian's keen eyes caught the minute tremor, the almost imperceptible pull in the air. He didn't understand the magic, but he saw the effect. "He's enchanting the room," Hermione hissed, her wand now fully drawn. "Wards, protective charms, probably designed to trap us, or at least slow us down." "Logic suggests," Julian observed, his mind racing, "that if the intention is to trap, there must be a way out. And if the intention is to slow, the obstacles will follow a discernible pattern." He pointed to a small, ornate clock on a nearby mantelpiece. "The chronometer." "He's not just warding, he's influencing spatial and temporal perception. Notice how the ambient chatter seems to fade." Indeed, the general hubbub of the gala was receding, replaced by an unnerving quiet that seemed to press in on them. Blackwood smiled, his eyes glinting. "Very astute, Mr. Thorne. Even muggles can occasionally perceive the weave. But perceiving is not controlling." He flicked his wrist. The Roman amphora, now glowing faintly with a sickly green light, began to levitate. It moved with unnatural speed, not directly at them, but towards a narrow hallway leading to the archives. "A diversion," Hermione shouted, firing a protego charm. The amphora crashed into the invisible shield, shattering into countless ceramic shards, which then shimmered and dissolved as if they'd never been there. "Impressive, Miss Granger," Blackwood purred, already retreating down the hallway. "But you can't be everywhere at once." As he spoke, ancient tapestries on the walls seemed to ripple and swell, their woven figures momentarily twisting into grotesque, menacing visages before solidifying back into innocuous scenes. Julian felt a strange disorientation, a subtle shift in his sense of balance. "The tapestries," Finch murmured, his gaze piercing through the illusion. "Temporal displacement charms. They're designed to confuse, to make one doubt the present. A classic trick for misdirection." "He's trying to make us lose time," Julian deduced, fighting through the sudden fuzziness in his head. "To create an opening to escape, or to access something. The archives." He lunged forward, ignoring the faint dizziness, focusing on the solid ground beneath his feet. Hermione followed, sending a stunning spell towards the hallway, but it dissipated harmlessly against Blackwood's retreating form. As they entered the narrow, book-lined corridor, the true nature of Blackwood's traps became clear. Bookshelves seemed to shift and rearrange themselves, blocking their path. Shadows lengthened and deepened, obscuring details, playing tricks on their eyes. The air grew heavy with the scent of old paper and something else, something metallic and sharp. "Illusions and physical transfigurations," Hermione explained, blasting a shelf that had morphed into solid stone. "He's good. He's using the building itself against us." Julian stopped, his eyes scanning the chaotic scene. "No, not chaotic. Structured chaos. The shifting patterns, they're too regular to be truly random." "Observe the dust motes, Hermione. They react to the magical energy, but they still follow air currents. The shadows cling to the existing architecture, they don't create new geometry. He's not remaking reality. He's distorting it, exploiting its weaknesses." "What are you saying?" Hermione asked, panting slightly as another section of the wall rippled, threatening to enclose them. "He's creating a labyrinth of perception," Julian said, a flash of insight illuminating his face. "Not a physical one. If we ignore the visual cues, the disorientation, and focus on the underlying structure, the path is still there. The building's true layout. He's playing on our fear, on our magical dependency, expecting us to fight what isn't entirely real. The actual physical changes are minimal, designed to make us believe the greater distortion." Finch chuckled, a dry, almost approving sound. "The heart of the maze, Julian, is often the mind that navigates it. So, if we trust the feeling of the space, not the sight," Hermione muttered, her eyes narrowing as she tried to pierce the shimmering distortions. "Focus on the physical anchors," Julian pointed. "That cracked tile on the floor, the original line of the skirting board. Follow the underlying logic of the architect who built this building, not the chaos of Blackwood's magic." They moved, Julian leading, not looking at the shifting walls, but focusing on the faint, stable lines he perceived, almost felt, beneath the magical haze. Hermione, initially hesitant, began to trust his strange, logical intuition, casting minimal defensive charms to deflect minor physical hazards Blackwood had conjured. They bypassed a conjured wall of ancient scrolls by simply walking through what appeared to be empty space beside it, where Julian had logically deduced the original wall should be. The corridor finally opened into a vast, circular chamber, the Society's main archive. Bookshelves stretched to the vaulted ceiling, arranged in concentric circles like a vast, knowledge-laden spiral. In the very center, illuminated by a single, powerful beam of light from a high skylight, stood Silas Blackwood. He wasn't fleeing. He was waiting. And he held something in his hand, a small, intricately carved stone, pulsating with a faint, ghostly luminescence. The Resurrection Stone. "You are tenacious," Blackwood said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Especially you, Mr. Thorne. To see beyond the glamour, to find the underlying truth, admirable for one so uninitiated. Pity you choose to stand against progress. Progress at the cost of countless lives and the very fabric of time?" Hermione scoffed. Blackwood shrugged. "Small sacrifices for a truly enlightened future. With the Hallows, I can sculpt an era free of conflict, free of doubt. Imagine a world where every decision, every historical turning point, is optimized for humanity's ultimate good." "That's not good," Blackwood, Julian said, his voice steady despite the surge of adrenaline. "That's tyranny. You'd remove free will, agency. You'd make us puppets of your optimized reality." "A reality where I am the master weaver," Blackwood agreed, a chillingly calm smile gracing his lips. He raised the Resurrection Stone. "And with this, the threads of past, present, and future are mine to command. The Elder Wand is already secured. The cloak, well, the cloak is far more subtle, but its power will soon yield to Aevum's will." He gestured around the archive. "This entire facility is now attuned to my will. Every artifact, every ancient text, a conduit for the Hallows' power. Consider yourselves guests of a history in the making." As he spoke, the very air in the archive began to shimmer, not with confusion, but with raw, focused magical energy. The shelves of books, the ancient artifacts, the very stones of the building, they seemed to vibrate with a nascent power. Julian felt a profound sense of wrongness, a fundamental twisting of reality. Blackwood wasn't just planning to use the Hallows, he was preparing a ritual here and now. The room was not merely warded, it was becoming a focal point, a crucible for temporal manipulation. "He's not just holding the stone," Hermione gasped, her eyes wide with dawning horror. "He's drawing power from these historical objects, charging it. He's going to use the stone here, in this archive, to anchor a temporal distortion." Blackwood laughed, a triumphant, almost joyous sound. "Precisely, Ms. Granger. The Royal Historical Society. The perfect place to rewrite history. And you, my dear detectives, will be the first witnesses. Or perhaps, the first erased." A blinding flash of green light erupted from the Resurrection Stone in Blackwood's hand, spreading like a ripple through the archive. The air crackled, and Julian felt a searing pain in his temples, as if his very thoughts were being stretched and distorted. The books on the shelves began to glow, their pages flickering as if being read at impossible speed. "He's activating the ritual," Hermione screamed, struggling against the intense magical pressure. "We have to stop him, Julian. Now." The air beneath Elizabeth Tower was thick with the dust of centuries and the ozone tang of raw magic. Julian, Hermione, and Finch, having navigated a labyrinth of forgotten Victorian service tunnels and a newly revealed magically shielded passage, now stood at the threshold of a vast, circular chamber. The rough-hewn stone walls were covered in faded, intricate carvings, not just runic, but almost mathematical in their geometric precision, glowing faintly with a residual, ancient energy. In the center, a raised dais cradled the 3 Deathly Hallows. The Elder Wand pulsed with an ominous, violet light, its power barely contained. The Resurrection Stone, mounted on a silver stand, emanated a cold, blue luminescence, flickering with spectral images that were almost too fast to discern. The invisibility cloak, draped over a smaller pedestal, shimmered like undisturbed water, its edges blurring into the very fabric of reality. Silas Blackwood stood before them, a chilling smile plastered on his face. He wore academic tweeds, but there was nothing benign about his posture or the manic glint in his eyes. A coterie of robed figures, members of the Order of Aevum, flanked him, their wands raised. "So, the Muggles and the Mudblood finally catch up," Blackwood sneered, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Though I admit, Mr. Thorne, your deductive leaps have been impressive. A pity you align yourself with the past, not the future." "The future you intend to craft by unraveling causality itself, Blackwood?" Julian's voice was calm, cutting through the tension. He took in the chamber, the Hallows, the subtle energy fluctuations he could now almost feel. His brain, once a prisoner of pure empiricism, was now a bridge between observation and inexplicable truth. He saw patterns, not just facts. "Your designs on the Statute of Secrecy are transparent. You wish to return to an era where your kind ruled overtly, with the Hallows as your temporal scepter." Hermione, wand in hand, stepped forward. "You can't just rewrite history, Blackwood. The consequences would be catastrophic for both worlds. The veil exists for a reason. A reason for the weak to hide their mediocrity." Blackwood laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "I will simply ensure the Statute of Secrecy never came to pass. Magic will reclaim its rightful place, and my order will guide it into a new, glorious empire. The Hallows, united by my intellect and the temporal convergence point of this chamber, will allow me to anchor a new timeline, where magic reigns supreme, and the chaos of Muggle innovation is confined to dusty history books." He gestured grandly to the Hallows. "This chamber, directly beneath the world's most famous timekeeper, acts as a natural temporal nexus. The Hallows amplify this resonance, allowing for direct manipulation of the past." "A temporal nexus is precisely what it is," Julian mused aloud, ignoring Blackwood's bluster, his gaze sweeping over the ancient carvings. "But a nexus is also a point of extreme instability. Like any complex system, it requires precise calibration. One miscalculation, and the entire structure collapses, or worse, reverberates into an unpredictable cascade." Blackwood's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "You know nothing of temporal mechanics, Thorne. This is magic, not a sum you can solve. But magic, like all phenomena, must obey some underlying rules," Julian countered, his mind racing. "The Hallows are powerful, yes, but they are not omnipotent. They manipulate, they amplify, they conceal, but they do not create from nothing. They require an anchor, a source, and a target. And their use must follow a logical pathway, however esoteric." "He's right, Silas," Hermione shouted, firing a stunning spell that one of Blackwood's acolytes narrowly dodged. "Ancient magic is bound by principles. You're overreaching." "Silence," Blackwood roared, grabbing the elder wand from its stand. Its purple light flared, casting grotesque shadows. "The time for debate is over. The convergence begins now." He began to chant, a guttural, ancient language Julian instinctively recognized as having a rhythmic, almost numerical pattern. As Blackwood spoke, the runes on the walls glowed brighter, and the Hallows began to hum in unison, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated through the very stones. The air shimmered, and Julian felt a strange disorientation, as if the ground beneath his feet was shifting through time. Hermione was already conjuring shimmering shields and firing curses, engaging the acolytes. Finch, who had been quietly observing from behind Julian, spoke, his voice a low rumble. "He is attempting to synchronize the Hallows with the temporal flow of the tower. A delicate operation, truly. One wrong note." Julian's gaze snapped to Finch, then back to Blackwood. "One wrong note. Blackwood's ambition, his desire for ultimate control, is his weakness. He believes he can dictate the flow. But if the Hallows themselves are not perfectly attuned to each other, or to the temporal nexus, the feedback will be immense." He saw it, a fleeting glimpse of a cascade of energy, a ripple effect that didn't just alter the past but fractured it. He remembered an obscure paragraph in an ancient text Hermione had shown him, describing the perils of using powerful artifacts in close proximity without proper warding, not just magical warding, but what Julian now understood as systemic warding. A protection against logical inconsistencies. Hermione! Julian yelled over the din of spells and Blackwood's chanting. The Hallows aren't just amplifying power, they're resonating. He's trying to create a unified temporal field. But the stone represents communion with the dead, the cloak represents separation from the living, and the wand, mastery over life. They are fundamentally contradictory principles at their core. He's forcing them into an artificial harmony. What does that mean, Julian? Hermione deflected a jet of red light with a swift flick of her wand. It means their individual magical signatures are resisting the forced synthesis. Julian articulated, pointing at the Hallows. The wand's raw power clashes with the cloak's absolute void, which clashes with the stone's connection to the departed. Blackwood is trying to override their intrinsic nature to force a single outcome. If we can introduce a specific logical inconsistency into his ritual, the system will overload. A logical inconsistency? Hermione repeated, bewildered even as she stunned another acolyte. He's treating them like a simple circuit, but they're a complex, interconnected network of intent and power, Julian explained rapidly, his mind clearer than ever. The cloak doesn't just hide, it severs. The stone doesn't just call, it binds. The wand doesn't just direct, it imposes. He's trying to make them all impose a single temporal alteration. But the cloak's very essence is to not impose, to not interact. It's a fundamental contradiction within his ritual design. Blackwood, overhearing Julian's analysis, turned, his face contorted in a snarl. Fool! You cannot apply your Muggle arithmetic to the profound truths of magic. It is beyond your limited comprehension. He raised the Elder Wand, and a bolt of pure energy, crackling with temporal distortion, shot towards Julian. Hermione, anticipating it, threw up a powerful protego. The shield buckled, but held. Julian, how to exploit it? The cloak! Julian yelled, ducking behind a pillar as another curse whizzed past. It's the point of greatest internal resistance. Its purpose is non-interference. By attempting to force it to interfere with the timeline, Blackwood has created a logical paradox within the Hallows' combined operation. We need to disengage it. Not by physical force, but by reasserting its core function. Reassert its core function? What do you mean? Hermione cried, battling two acolytes now. Make it truly invisible. Julian replied, a flash of insight hitting him. Not just unseen, but truly non-existent to the temporal stream Blackwood is trying to create. If the cloak is fully manifesting its nature as absence, it will break the unified field, and the feedback will shatter his ritual. Finch, having listened intently, offered a rare, approving nod. A brilliant deduction, Julian. The very essence of the cloak's magic is isolation. If its magical signature asserts true detachment, it becomes an unworkable variable in Blackwood's equation. But how do we do that? Hermione asked, her voice strained. Julian's eyes scanned the ancient runes, the flow of magic. The symbols, they're meant to contain and direct the Hallows' power. Blackwood is manipulating them. Hermione, can you reverse the polarity on the runes directly surrounding the cloak's pedestal? Not to destroy them, but to make them reinforce the cloak's natural state of non-interaction, instead of forcing it into cooperation. Reverse the polarity. Hermione muttered, her eyes widening as she understood. You mean, essentially, cast a counter-charm that reasserts the cloak's privacy. A spell of profound disengagement, amplified by the ritual's own energy, but directed away from Blackwood's intent. Precisely, Julian shouted. It's a logical circuit, Hermione. We're not fighting magic with magic. We're fighting a logical magic with logical magic. Blackwood, realizing their intent, screamed, "Stop them. Don't let them near the cloak." He aimed the Elder Wand at Hermione, but Julian, moving with a speed he hadn't known he possessed, tackled an acolyte attempting to intercept Hermione, sending them both sprawling. Hermione, seizing the opportunity, sprinted towards the cloak's pedestal. With a desperate surge of magic, she pointed her wand at the runes surrounding it. Finite incantatem. Reduco ad esse. Non interfero. She chanted a complex series of spells, not merely counter charms, but incantations designed to amplify the cloak's inherent property of non-existence within the current magical construct. As her magic hit the runes, the shimmering cloak didn't just disappear, it seemed to evaporate from the temporal field. The blue light of the resurrection stone flared wildly, and the violet pulse of the Elder Wand began to flicker erratically. The entire chamber groaned, and the floor beneath them vibrated violently. Blackwood screamed as the temporal field he had painstakingly built began to unravel. The Elder Wand flew from his hand, clattering harmlessly to the ground. The Hallows' combined energy, no longer forced into an unnatural unity, began to feed back upon itself. The runes on the walls, instead of glowing, began to implode, sucking light inwards. A deafening roar filled the chamber as the unstable temporal energy, no longer contained by Blackwood's twisted ritual, erupted. Instead of a focused beam to rewrite history, it became a chaotic maelstrom, ripping at the fabric of space and time within the chamber itself. The acolytes shrieked, their robes tearing, as they were caught in the temporal eddies, vanishing and reappearing in flashes of light, their forms distorting. "Get out!" Finch bellowed, already pulling Julian towards the magically concealed exit. Julian grabbed Hermione's hand, dragging her. Blackwood, wide-eyed with terror, reached for the Hallows, but a wave of raw temporal energy engulfed him. He twisted, his face frozen in a silent scream, before dissolving into a shower of light and shadow, swallowed by the very forces he had sought to control. They stumbled out of the chamber just as the entrance shimmered and sealed itself with a deafening crack. The deep thrumming ceased, leaving an eerie silence. Julian leaned against the cold stone of the tunnel, his breath ragged. He looked at Hermione, her face smudged with dust and concern, then at Finch, whose usual stoicism was slightly softened by a look of profound satisfaction. "It worked," Julian said, not in triumph, but in a quiet awe. "My logic, combined with your magic. It truly is a system. A deeper, more complex system than I ever imagined, but a system nonetheless." Hermione smiled, a genuine, relieved smile. "You didn't just accept magic, Julian. You understood it. You saw its rules, its inherent logic. You found the loophole Blackwood missed." Finch adjusted his spectacles. "Indeed. You applied a rational mind to an irrational problem, Julian. And in doing so, you have not only saved history but perhaps unlocked a new path for us all." He looked at the sealed entrance. "The Hallows are safe for now. Contained within an unstable nexus, beyond human reach for the foreseeable future, until the temporal energies stabilize. Blackwood's gambit, self-consuming as it was, ensures their isolation." Julian looked back at the now featureless stone where the chamber had been. The unexplainable fringes of his cases suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. The world was not just as he saw it, it was more. And he, Julian Thorne, the staunch rationalist, had bridged the gap. He hadn't debunked magic. He had debunked his own narrow perception of reality. "So," Julian said, turning back to his companions, a new glint in his eyes, "what happens when another illogical problem arises? When the veil strains again, or when an ancient system needs a new kind of logic applied?" He paused, a slow, determined smile spreading across his face. "I believe I've just found my true calling." He looked at Hermione, a silent understanding passing between them. "I have a feeling our work has only just begun."